Omega is a watch brand that needs a little introduction. It was founded in 1848 and is one of the most respected and recognised manufacturers in the business. Omega has countless accolades to its name, including being the official timekeeper of the Olympic Games since 1932, and it produces the only watch certified by NASA for spacewalks. Omega is also highly innovative, being first to mass produce the coaxial escapement, which has been described by some as the most significant advancement in mechanical watchmaking of the last century. It has most recently produced the first movement resistant to magnetic fields in excess of 15,000 Gauss. Omega's contribution to horology really cannot be overstated, and today they produce some of the most technically advanced movements available on a mass-produced scale. The Seamaster was first produced by Omega in 1948, and it's still in production today, making it Omega's longest running model. The line has a storied history of use by navies around the world, and it was first based on models that had been produced exclusively for the British Royal Navy towards the end of the Second World War. At its core, the Seamaster has always been about water resistance and legibility. The Seamaster began life as a watch at the dressier end of the scale, and was advertised as a watch that could go from the beach to the dinner party, as it was rugged yet elegant with a dependable and precise movement. Here we have one of those early Seamasters from around 1960. This is the reference 14389-3, and it's a very vintage size of 35mm in diameter and a thickness of 7.5mm. It's a really great piece that is very versatile and is in incredibly good condition given its age. Some of you with more modern tastes in watches, particularly guys that have become accustomed to larger watches, may think that this one is a no-go due to its diminutive size. With many contemporary men's watches coming in at 40+ mm in diameter, this one is certainly small at 35mm, but you can see that on my 7-inch wrist it still looks great, and by no means does it feel too small or dainty. I really think that folks shouldn't immediately dismiss smaller watches without trying them on, and although it is very much personal preference, your wrist can still look great with quite a wide range of watch sizes. I also think that at some point smaller watches will come back into style. This one was once considered a large men's watch, after all. The watch has very sharp looking radium inlaid and faceted hour and minute hands. It also has radium pips at the end of the hour markers, and those hour markers are applied gold batons that are arrow tipped towards the centre of the dial. There are also applied gold Arabic numerals at 12, 3 and 9 o'clock. As I've just said, this watch comes from an era in watchmaking prior to the invention of superluminova, when radium paint was used to provide for luminosity of the dial, so that it could still be read in low light conditions. Unfortunately, there are two big problems with radium paint. Firstly, it chemically decays over time and will lose its ability to glow within at most a couple of decades. The bigger problem is that radium is radioactive. It emits high energy photons and will continue to do so for thousands of years. The quantity of radiation given off is not high enough to endanger human health, unless perhaps you were to open up the watch and swallow the material. However, radium decays to radon gas that is a known carcinogen and responsible for increasing the risk of lung cancer in particular. But again, the quantities given off are likely too small to affect human health, and as long as the watch is kept in a ventilated area, there should be little risk. The dial is covered by plexiglass that is prone to scratches. This was prior to the use of sapphire crystal. A neat feature on the original Omega plexiglass is the etched Omega logo in the centre of the glass, directly above the central pinion of the hours and minutes hands. If you're watching this video on a big enough screen, you can just make it out here and in some of the other shots. The crown is also 14 karat gold, and it is signed with the Omega logo. The dial of the watch is a lovely white or cream colour depending on how the light hits it. There is a small or sub-seconds hand at 6 o'clock that is a simple gold hand with small counterweight above a very fine black crosshair printed on the dial. There is a gold applied Omega logo below 12 o'clock. This is a more stylized Omega logo that was used by the manufacturer at this time versus what is used on more modern pieces. I would describe it as being curvier than the modern Omega logo. Below this there is printed Omega and Seamaster in black, with the Omega text capitalized in a clean font, followed by the italicized and flourished Seamaster text. At the very bottom of the dial you can just see Swiss made on the outside of the black printed minutes track. It's a really classy combination of colours that's going on here, and it really makes the watch look classic and not dated. This piece is on a new leather strap, but the original strap is a lovely black cowhide with matching stitching and gold Omega signature on the underside. The pin buckle is also gold with a beautiful and thick Omega logo on the tang. Omega no longer produces Seamaster models that look like this classic piece. All of the Seamasters are now larger with more stylized dials, and most have lyre-shaped lugs borrowed from the Speedmaster instead of the straight lugs seen here. Most also have dive bezels. While there are many Omega Seamasters that I find appealing today, from both an aesthetic and modern technology standpoint, I actually think that this Seamaster has a certain quality that few of the modern pieces have, and that it is perhaps more timeless. I think that this watch will always be a classy piece that can be dressed up or down, and it will never go out of style. The closest Omega has come to recreating this style of Seamaster in recent years is when they released these two limited edition Seamaster 1948s to mark the 70th anniversary of the Seamaster model. You can really see all of the elements from the 14389 that we have here in these two modern re-editions. The hour indices, the Arabic numerals, the Seamaster and Omega fonts, and the vintage styled Omega logo. If you combine the Dauphine shaped hands and the minute track from the model on the right with the small seconds watch on the left, you get very close to the vintage model 14389 that we have here. Although I think I actually prefer the classic white dial to the silver dials on these two new iterations. The watch is what's called capped, meaning it has a shell of 14 karat yellow gold, and the underside of the case and the case back are stainless steel. This capping of gold is distinct from gold plating, as it is actually solid gold placed on top of steel rather than a thin layer bonded onto the surface of the steel, as in electroplating. As you can see on this watch, the gold cap has not faded or worn off like plated gold would. The case back has a really surprising amount of detail and a lot to look at, considering this is a vintage watch from around 60 years ago. The case back has a rather beautifully embossed Seamaster insignia with Seamaster text written above the Omega hippocampus or seahorse. I believe that the hippocampus was first adopted on Seamaster models in 1958, and it comes from Greek mythology, as they were the sea monsters that pulled the god of the sea, Poseidon's chariot. It's used here to symbolise protection from the sea and as a means for Omega to promote the water-resistant capability of the watch. The case back is of the screw-down variety rather than snap-in, which helps get this watch to its original 30-metre water resistance. The Seamaster was also the first Omega to use a rubber O-ring to create a watertight seal on the case back. Although this being a vintage watch with possible degraded seals, you must assume that it is not currently watertight and avoid submersing it. This model does not have a screw-down crown, so that's another possible avenue for water ingress. Talking of liquid ingress, now let's pair this watch with a Scotch. I'm pairing the Omega Seamaster with Glen Scotia 12-year-old single malt Scotch. The Glen Scotia distillery was founded in 1832 in Campbelltown, a small town known in Victorian times as the whisky capital of the world. Much like Omega is from La Chaux de Fonds in Switzerland, and it is considered a city of watchmakers, with Tag Heuer, Ball, Breitling, Tissot, Ulysse Nardin, Patek Philippe, among others, all having headquarters or factories there. Campbelltown once had over 30 distilleries in operation, but it now has only 3. Campbelltown and its whisky production fell on hard times as a result of the American Prohibition and the Great Depression of the 1920s and 1930s. And domestically in Scotland and across the UK, whisky tastes shifted away from the characteristically smoky and oily dram produced in Campbelltown. There are perhaps similarities between what happened to Campbelltown's distilleries and the so-called quartz crisis that did in so many Swiss watch manufacturers. We've got one of Scotland's most iconic animals on the bottle, the hairy Highland cow. You'll also notice that this is 46% alcohol by volume. Scotch must be at least 40% ABV by law, but this one is a little higher than most. You tend to find that the higher the ABV, the more robust the flavour. This whisky is matured in bourbon casks. All Scotch is matured in casks from other types of drinks like bourbon, sherry and port, but when ex-bourbon casks are used, you tend to find that the Scotch takes on a creamier versus fruity profile. When we first check out the whisky, we can see that it's a lovely caramel colour, with slow moving legs as it runs back down the inside of the glass. It's a nicely matured whisky. The nose of the whisky is smoky with a little bit of spice and herbs. The taste is peaty and woody with a creamy sweetness, saltiness and malt flavour. The finish, what we notice after swallowing, is long and has a little bit of herbiness in it. It's a great drink that is really suitable for long, rainy evenings. Omega had to really fight through the quartz crisis to remain competitive in a market flooded with cheaper and more accurate quartz pieces. It had to be careful, however, not to price itself out of the market and also not degrade its perceived quality and mechanical expertise by producing cheaper quartz pieces. Not an easy situation to find yourself in. But Omega came through this trying time by continuing to innovate and by producing quality mechanical pieces. Glen Scotia has survived in a similar way by sticking to its production of classic Campbelltown styled whisky. That's why I've paired the Seamaster with Glen Scotia 12-year-old single malt. Both have continued to stick with what made them famous in the first place. What do you think of this vintage Omega Seamaster? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, do please like and subscribe.